Hello everyone, today we read and comment the 14th chapter of the third book of von Clausewitz Vom Kriege, the title being Economy of Forces. The text follows. The road of reason, as we have said, seldom allows itself to be reduced to a mathematical line by principles and opinions. There remains always a certain margin, but it is the same in all the practical arts of life. For the lines of beauty there are no abscissae and ordinates. Circles and ellipses are not described by means of the algebraical formulae. The actor in war therefore soon finds he must trust himself to the delicate tact of judgment which, founded on natural quickness of perception and educated by reflection, almost unconsciously seizes upon the right. He soon finds that at one time he must simplify the law by reducing it to some prominent characteristic points which form his rules, that at another the adopted method must become the staff on which he leans. As one of these simplified characteristic points as a mental appliance, we look upon the principle of watching continually over the cooperation of all forces, or in other words, of keeping constantly in view that no part of them should ever be idle. Whoever has forces where the enemy does not give them sufficient employment, whoever has a part of his forces on the march, that is, allows them to lie dead while the enemies are fighting, he is a bad manager of his forces. In this sense, there is a waste of forces which is even worse than their employment to no purpose. If there must be action, then the first point is that all parts act, because the most purposeless activity still keeps employed and destroys a portion of the enemy's force, whilst troops completely inactive are, for the moment, quite neutralized. Unmistakably, this idea is bound up with the principles contained in the last three chapters. It is the same truth, but seen from a somewhat more comprehensive point of view, and condensed into a single conception. So this is a relatively small chapter we have just read, and as von Clausewitz pointed out just now in the end, he basically refers to the previous three chapters that have fundamentally to do with the concentration of forces, right? And the 14th chapter sums up what conceptually the average line, right, of approach to the matter should be for the economy of forces. That is, fundamentally, when you have to act, you should employ all the forces simultaneously, right, if you can, right, or at least not to leave them without a purpose, right, definitely not wasting energies if you can employ them, right. Obviously, as we have seen also in the previous three chapters, is modified by the needs of the circumstances, in which, for example, if you keep a force in reserve because you fundamentally don't know what it's out there and it's just a precaution that could turn out to be actually useful, where the enemy to appear from a moment to another, is still not idle, right? It's still something different from not employing all your forces at the same time. Here von Clausewitz, and we have seen it especially in the last chapter, fundamentally stigmatizes the commander that, having certain forces at disposal, kind of decides arbitrarily to say, okay, well, I don't need many of them after all, right? Because we have seen that in the broader philosophy of the art of war, this doesn't correspond to the logic of war per se, right? Was war to be an absolute force, it would fundamentally, explode, the deflagrate in one instant, and everything would be settled henceforth. As we have seen also, the concept of reserve and saying, okay, well, we may not need to employ all our forces in this place, but maybe keeping others ready to act is yet another thing. And yet another thing is exiting from this strictly military dimension and saying, well, but there is politics that is employing this military instrument, and therefore your politics, for whichever reason that is not military, right, per se, decides that we should not employ all of our forces. At this point, we're out properly of the theory of the art of war, and we basically enter in another one that has nothing to do with that, because as we've seen, the theory of the art of war is based fundamentally on the not in the assumption, but in fact on the fact proper that your given military means as a commander have already been entrusted to you by politics. And even if commanders can naturally have a say in political matters, still conceptually speaking, that's politics, that's not war. So it's obvious, this is just for, preventing some, any criticism of sort, that is to say, why do countries do not employ all their forces at once? But guess what? Because there is politics, because there is society, and because, as we have seen basically throughout all the world Vom Kriege, we live in a world that limits constantly all of our actions for a reason or another, right? And that is also intelligent to limit in this regard. So many people will misinterpret the Clausewitzian theory, say, von Clausewitz is a guy who basically would like war to be as destructive as possible, and because he's kind of crazy. No, the Clausewitzian concept is wholly different. It basically states, and that's proof that people don't even read von Clausewitz, is that reality, real warfare is always limited, and there is nothing you can't do about it. But if you have the means to achieve superiority on the enemy, you shouldn't waste it, right? Because in strictly military, but also humanitarian terms in parallel, that's the best option, right? That's paradoxically the one that will bring to less bloodshed. And that will, at some point, even just through sheer deterrence, for example, to not even fight, right? Because we have seen that fundamentally war breaks out when there is someone who, from the other side, if from one of the sides is confident of the fact that he could win after all, right? So if you increase your forces in this regard, you basically flatten this probability, and you may not need to fight. So of course the Clausewitzian theory is extremely sophisticated, but it's very concrete, and it's actually very simple to understand. And in this chapter that we read now, so Economy of Forces, von Clausewitz writes, "The road of reason, as we have said, seldom allows itself to be reduced to a mathematical line of principles and options." Right. These are a resume, if you want, of the whole Clausewitzian vision of spirit and matter and the limits of our gnosiological capabilities. Right. That is to say, we basically make a great effort to understand the reality scientifically, in a purely rational way. But this, by definition, is impossible. There is not a single human product that is rational, that is unbiased, that comes from a context that could constantly modify it. Even our physical understanding of the world is fundamentally something we figured out and put into, written down into a mathematical language. But fundamentally, if something came out of the blue to disprove this, we will have simply to adapt to this. And this is probably what the true nature of science is. It is, if I find a contrasting evidence, a disproving evidence, I have to get rid of the mistake. So whatever I believed in before, is to be, of course, it should have been proven in the first place, but also something whichever new comes next that I hadn't conceived now must be integrated in this hopefully rational way. That, however, should always take in consideration the fact we don't know most of the times what the hell is out there. And for whoever is acquainted to the history of science, and how mankind fundamentally went through this journey discovering the world, you realize that the physical principle in itself is literally it's the most important thing for a practical use, but in the whole process is literally the least important, because all what is important is understanding how and why you arrived to that point, and the commitment and the resources that you needed for that. So unfortunately, philosophy of science and history of technology in general is highly disregarded in this sense. We most sometimes exchange science for a new religion, or as a something that it's cent for cent true. Look at scientific debate, what it actually is, right? In the most purely scientific sense of the term, it's a constant debate, right? There is a kind of a consensus laying in the middle, but fundamentally every single person believes something slightly different, or sometimes even more different. But this is not a limitation. This is not a criticism to science. On the contrary, it's actually it should be, at least, and we don't talk about this at all, right? But our greatest joy, in the sense that we succeeded in actually make a lot of things work in this world, then improved sensibly our quality of life, our existence, exactly without being rational, right? Or better, adding, of course, the necessary amount of rationale, but essentially not reducing, how von Clausewitz puts it here, the road of reason to be reduced to a mathematical line by principles and opinions. That is, what we call reason is much more than mathematical language. It's much more than that. It's actually the capacity, the criticism, the judgment, the coup d'oeil, the observation, the synthesis capability, the intuition, that all contributes to write that formula. And that's the greatness that stands behind human mind and science and knowledge in itself. And this is what the Vom Kriege is based on, philosophically speaking. War is possibly the single most complicated system to sort out, not because, of course, war by itself is more complicated than the universe that contains it, for example, but for the sake of practical use. This is actually what theory, and science objectively are aimed to. It's definitely the one to have to frame and try to solve in the least under the greatest conditions of pressure, right? Because you're literally out there to be butchered, and you don't have much of an option. So war presents fundamentally a testing ground for this innate ability of human mind that, frankly, we don't understand anything of, scientifically speaking, how it actually works, but that it does work, and that it is a miracle. It's amazing, right? And that allows, in war more than in any other field, to attain this understanding, fundamentally, of what is going on. Obviously not cent for cent. Actually, von Clausewitz says, that for every decision you take in war, basically you don't know 75% all the time of what you should know in order to take that decision safely, right? So you can't resolve that, because guess what? Humans are not meant to sort out the universe, and fortunately, I would say, they will never be able to. And this is also the beauty of existence in itself, because otherwise we wouldn't even be human at that point. We would deny ourselves. We would deny our own reason. Everything would be literally idling, and we would probably be dead at the end of the day. Not even life would have a meaning. But we have this mandate on Earth to naturally frame this reality under these, this understanding that is really a way of seeing the thing, right? It's the omnicomprehensivity of human thinking relatively to what we are able to frame within our mind, not just a packed set of sterile informations that may even derive from a scientific thinking, but do not tell us much about the contingencies, as life in general shows us every single time, because we can't predict the future, very often not by the slightest. And the general idea here is that we should, in fact, cultivate this capacity, and not to pretend that solving systems like the one of war is possible through a mathematical line, a mathematical principle, right? Or even just a speculative opinion. You must experience something. So there is not a denial of, of evidence of the scientific method, scientific process, it's all based on that, right? Science is not the mathematical language. Science is literally how we understand with our brain, and we try to write it down and to make it have it more sense, studying on it, etc. So, because that's literally what science means etymologically speaking. That's knowledge fundamentally. So, this is a very powerful and impacting realization that if you don't take as the base of our existence, you can't understand not just the Vom Kriege, but a lot of other things. Like here from Clausewitz actually makes the same parallelism with life, right? If you pretend that life is understanding everything, I mean, what kind of experience you've had in your life? Like, you're an omniscient person, you actually understand almost everything. Nobody does. We don't know basically anything. We don't even know whether we exist or not. We don't know nothing. We're here floating and not understanding a freaking damn what we should actually, we actually wished we knew, right? Just by curiosity, by the way, because even that speculation is somewhat dangerous. Just concentrate on what we can experience first, which would be already a big deal. Then start thinking about, in speculative terms. But here there is a reality to sort out. So it's not that understanding war is a matter of personal, taste or divertissement that you can hear. There is, studying war, studying history, and what actually happened in reality, right? Not in books or in someone's mind, but what you went through every day, right, is an enormous deal, because politics, society, war are all interconnected. And if you refuse to understand war, like many people even want to do, thinking war is something intrinsically negative or a denial of humanity, well, those are dangerous people. Those are people who have very serious mental problems, and that cause some of the most problematic political and social situations, because at that point you just find an absolute radical extremism that doesn't find any meeting point with reality, right? Militarism and pacifism are actually the double face of the same insanity. There is no intellectual, moral, civic pride in being, pacifist or a militarist. There must be a clarity of vision that extremism and absolute thinking, simply cannot meet, because they are delusions, right? And what we study here is the reality of war, right? And without repeating how this actually happens, but the important thing here, as von Clausewitz puts it, is that there remains always a certain margin. That is to say, you can't even get to this, cause-effect chain, ideally, which is never the case, because nobody has that full realization. And you can do it, you can approach that, by the way, the more you narrow the thing down to a detail, but conversely, you basically lose track of the whole, which is still the most important thing. So the thing is useless in itself, and it's actually much more instructive to space with your mind than trying to make sense of things that eventually will not help you. And von Clausewitz reassures us, says, but it is the same in all the practical arts of life. For the lines of beauty, there are no abscissa and ordinates. Circles and ellipses are not described by means of their algebraical formula, right? Let's be honest about this. What the hell were we talking about in the first place? Do you think that the world is perfect, the knowledge is perfect, that there is the truth? The truth does exist. The problem is, what the heck do we understand of it? Right? There is a lot you can do to get closer to it, unitly, if you get the right direction. But truth is not like something you have in your pocket, nor you can imagine to get at some point to be satisfied with. Like, if you really care about your your knowledge, your education, the best thing you can do is expanding your knowledge to the point that you will realize at every single step that the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know, and especially you cannot know. We should be thankful every time in our life that humans will never understand what this whole thing is about. And we should rejoice in the fact that we have, however, so much to learn from the whole experience anyway, to our benefit, right? I'm a Kantian, right? The same Von Clausewitz actually studied Kant, but, here there is a deep, actually, it's interesting because it has, this whole thinking has a rationalistic base, it's scientifically based, right? You can objectively come to know a lot in this world, and that's what you should concentrate on. If you take us the wrong road, you start speculating about nothing without an actual base, you're no use, literally. So, what is beauty? What is? We have seen that the moral dimension that exists in war, and that is actually the most important, and how much this is uncircumscribable, right? How you can't fundamentally describe quantify a feeling, if not by the same feeling, right? And these, as we've seen, are the most important aspects in warfare, and that makes you understand why, effectively, you can't sort out warfare through mathematical principles, right? This obsession of sorting out, having the big computer that tells you, who will win the war. Fortunately, I can tell you, we will never arrive to that, right? This has nothing to do with, just waiting for artificial intelligence to work out. This is a human problem, because artificial intelligence is humanly programmed, and even if it can't do astonishing things that humans can't do, still it's not something it can't take over on its own and sort out the whole thing, because how and why would it be capable of doing? So this is really another topic, and we shouldn't digress. But it's particularly important because von Clausewitz here highlights how we still can do an astonishing amount of things that, if you stop thinking, are actually and utterly insane, right? Without much of a problem, and we still don't care, right? Let's leave aside many things, but even the most banal, reflex that the human have, we have it, but we don't really care. And instead, we should be observing it and saying, what the heck, am I really able to understand and formulate all these, ideas, for example, in this very moment? Like, for example, this video is unsketched. Like, yeah, I have the text of the Vom Kriege in the front, but, I'm now, basically commenting on it without even preparing anything, right? And how does it work? How do I keep talking without even thinking about what I have to say? Don't you think it's astonishing? Think about it. You'll find it pretty much the same. Then von Clausewitz writes, the actor in war therefore soon finds he must trust himself to the delicate tact of judgment, right, which founded a natural quickness of perception and educated by reflection, almost unconsciously seizes upon the right. Right, this could be transferred literally to every single human experience. Like von Clausewitz says in war, because we are talking about war, but this really can be transferred in any other field. There is an element of judgment, right, that passes through delicate tact and capacity to formulate. Essentially, here it says through quickness of perception, right? There is this quickness of perception. It's the one that feeds us with what we have to know and think, right? Think about when if you have written a historical work, that you read the sources, you get enlightened by them, right? And you seem to you perceive something like more than actual, and that's mostly wrong, right, at the beginning, right? And then you have to educate yourself by reflection. But this is something, perception and reflection, that you're able to perform, and that will, as von Clausewitz says here, almost make you unconsciously seize upon the right. You don't know how it happened, but you just got it, right? You can't form new ideas. You can observe them from various points of view, and it never stops, because these ideas are not like crystallized. They always change. There's not even a single time in our lives we think about the same thing once, identically, right? And therefore we can appreciate the dimension of this all. We can appreciate the shades of all this perception and understanding. And Clausewitz then writes, the commander here, finds that at one time he must simplify the law by reducing it to some prominent characteristic points which form his rules. Right? Then at another, the adopted method must become the staff on which he leans. So this is also important. That is, once you learned something properly, you must make use of it in some way, or you should, at least, depending, of course, on what you have discovered. And at times you'll see that that's not enough, and nothing will ever be enough. Some other times you should say, you know what, I will take this, I will keep it in mind. The same goes with this back and forth goes on continuously in the Vom Kriege itself. We've seen many times how von Clausewitz fundamentally always leaves us with this asymptotic view of reality. That is, as much as something increases, something else decreases, and he doesn't tell us how, the golden, the golden here is that von Clausewitz tells us how this dynamic happens. Then, however, how this happens in every single moment, right, which value it assumes, in every single moment, well, that's something we have to sort out ourselves. And the point is, for those people who do not understand the Vom Kriege, is that exactly this, that the people will say, hey, but I want to know what those values are. I don't know what to do with this idea of how the mechanism works. And that is the mistake, because people are, it's the same idea with science, right? The same idea that, I need this hard fact here to know what to have to do. That's literally the most useless thing. What you need to do is learning a method, learning how to wrap your mind around certain data and how to frame and contextualize them. This is what the Vom Kriege provides you with, the structure of the method. Then you will help to feel this with your experience. That is to say, you can't understand anything about war. For example, if you either never commanded an army, which is a bit unlikely, statistically, or the population, but especially if you have, conversely, never studied, as an alternative, studied military history. You simply can't get there because you don't have the experience. You haven't used your mind to understand these mechanisms, right? And the same goes very deeply into the complexity of the thing. That is, as we often said, you can even read books for your entire life, but that by itself doesn't actually tell us, that doesn't tell anything about how deep your mind actually went through those books, right? How much you applicated your mind, how refined and synthetically capable your mind is, right? And that's also why we educate people, because until you don't make the brain passing through certain difficulties in order to solve them, the brain will remain under that level, right? And that's what the whole deal of education is passing through these various stages. And we have lost the plot, I would say, very much in this idea, not just because the quality of education has dramatically decreased, but because we do not teach what education is in the first place. We're just sometimes imposed it and say, okay, you have to do it, and then you think maybe secondary education is useless. The point is that secondary education is useful in the measure in which, if you really want to grow as an individual, as much as you grew through your primary school, middle school, high school, in the same exact way. That is, how deep do you really want to get in understanding, right? If you just take the quantitative data and you exclude the quality, you will never be able of this synthesis capability. That is what the whole deal of understanding is really about. And that's why we form people in this regard. That this has nothing to do eventually with the failure of the system, of educational system, which happens all the time, and that makes people distrust certain environments. That's also, why in certain countries now we're experiencing this dramatic shift towards insanity, especially in certain disciplines that I'm sad to say, there are humanistic ones. There should be actually some of the most brutally and violently challenging, like the same Vom Kriege points out, right? But that choose to simplify the thing, to think for dummies, so that there is some genius out there that thinks, I don't know, that physics is important and history is not, right? That's deeply rooted intellective, not even intellectual, properly intellective ignorance, right? It's really the incapacity to realize that there is something bigger than you, that you presume maybe you don't need, or maybe because you probably don't know it does exist, right? So we're facing actually a very weird time in history, because of course the lack of pressure in many ways has been in the last decades, in the last generations, was probably brought to this disaster. People just had what they had that they needed, and they didn't made much of an enormous effort compared to previous generations to get. Right, if you complain of a lifetime of working, which is a serious thing, right? That sacrificing your passions, have made certain decisions. That's tough. Nobody has to, anything to do about that. But do you think it was better, like, from Clausewitz's experience, to be born in 1780 and to join the army at 12 and basically going through the whole Napoleonic wars? And dying eventually in the 30s of illness, out there in campaign. Do you have an idea what that actually means, and what it means to have the work of a person that, in spite of this, was able to get an astonishing historical, physical, literary, education at all levels, right? These were the people of those times, and they came out of a system that pressured so much, that gave us this pure gems of quality that we have, and that we don't even bother ourselves to try to even understand. Why? Exactly because we don't have that pressure anymore, because we are completely disoriented from a moral, civical, and historical point of view, at the point that we don't care. It's just, fuck everything, right? We don't need this and that, we don't need civilization, we don't need order, we don't need hierarchies, we don't need discipline. As if these were things that, we had the option of giving up, right? This is the serious, the deep mental, I would say mental illness, because it's literally a problem it really starts from our mind, right? And it's something that in many ways we have never went through, historically speaking. We have definitely good antibodies to react to in many ways, but we must take an active action in order to develop, because otherwise there is not, and that's the point, that there is a lack of motivation that is one of the most dangerous things ever in the history of a civilization. And that's why I read and comment the Vom Kriege all this time, because I believe that this can open to so much understanding, right, and to so much dedication and responsibility that a person maybe that just gets on YouTube that doesn't wish to get, but it's the same idea of why we are doing all of this in the first place. What do you think made me make more than 700 videos on here at this point? I could do many other things. I think that this is actually worth it. It's more worth it than we can imagine. But once again, it's the lack of understanding. It's the lack of saying, I'm too lazy for this, or I don't care. I will just, do it later. And time passes, and we lose precious energies, and these things will impact others, right? Because if you remain at that level, you have to raise kids, and those kids are being formed in their age, and they do not receive much of another stimulus. Well, there's not much of a an improvement in the civilization on the long run, right? Compared to the one we could actually have, right? If we really applicated our minds from a day to another, we could literally change the entire world for the better in a massive and unprecedented way, just from one day to another. This is pure reality, and nobody gives a damn about it. That is not solving all the problems, right? This is not what we've been promised, that life will always be beautiful and happy, and we'll always have everything, and everything will be fine, and we'll always smile. No, life is dramatic, painful, dark. It always ends badly. Like there's not much of an option, and until you don't get on those tracks, saying, okay, there is also something to enjoy, but why and how should we put ourselves in game to do it, right? What kind of meaning does life have? Nothing. It's a wasted life, right? And for these people, it was normal to like von Clausewitz to acknowledge such thoughts that, of course, von Clausewitz was definitely not an ordinary mind. He was one of the greatest minds in the history of mankind, quite simply and easily, but he was still a human being, right? It's not a demigod. So, then von Clausewitz writes, as one of these simplified characteristic points as a mental appliance, right, we look upon the principle of watching continually over the cooperation of all forces, or in other words, of keeping constantly in view that no part of them should ever be idle. Right, and we've seen this in the previous chapters. We resumed it in the beginning, but given the the introduction here, the paragraph before, we have to understand what this means in practice. That is to say, if you have means to do something, why don't you do it? Right, literally, this is like a life philosophy, right? If you just content with yourself with what you have, you're not really doing a great service to yourself. That is not to say you should even have over expectations about things you can't achieve. But if you don't even try, to do it by degrees, like what are you living for? For eating chips, listening to YouTube, like what's the actual deal, right? It's not that you can't do it, of course. That can be a part of your relaxing routine, and that's the very psychologically healthy. Probably if you have the time doing that, you're probably also slightly more successful than our people who are constantly under unhealthy degrees of pressure for our biological standards. But the point is really that we have seen it in von Clausewitz in an anthropological analysis that humans tends to be lazy, right? Tends towards idleness. Here, in fact, he uses the same word. That is to say, if you leave a person but any organism, telling the truth, unchallenged, that will be no transformation. There will not be no application and development. The same goes in evolution, right? Even if there is probably not a limit, right? Here we enter in a different topic because, of course, it implies our free will and evolutionary speaking. This would open an enormous debate, but it's a bit the same thing. Like, you can't have a robust organism if you don't have the conditions and the reasons and the pressure in many ways for that thing to be like that, to survive in the environment. So this is a bit the same. Von Clausewitz writes, whoever has forces where the enemy does not give them sufficient employment, whoever has a part of his forces on the march, that is, allows them to lie dead while the enemies are fighting, he is a bad manager of his forces. Right? If you have to fight and you keep your forces out of it, right? This is bad, right? You're failing at what you're doing, and this has enormous implications in many ways. It really gets down to that principle of absolute war that not even primordially, maybe in a theoretical sense, is what von Clausewitz conceived. Like the idea that if you really care about winning a fight, it's obvious that you have to overwhelm the enemy with all your force. Otherwise, what are you fighting for? Like, of course, here are the implications. Like, what are you fighting for? What's the political mandate of the military action? That's what all reality is about. War doesn't fight by itself, right? War is nothing but a political act, an instrument. Nothing else. War does not exist per se. There are people who fight for reasons, right? And war is just a mean, just an instrument you employ. Then how you employ it really depends on you. War has nothing in itself intrinsically active, alive feel. It's just you, right? So always try to picture this as a duel, right? Always remember, von Clausewitz says, war is nothing but a duel on a large scale. That's exactly what it is. It's not a an hyperbole or just a poetic license. It's literally what it is. Try to figure this as if you were fighting against a person, and think about all the implications that this has. Not the fact that you have to abstractly fight as people wish they could do. Like all those people who have been trained to resist robberies against armed people. That's criminal, right? If you don't have another weapon with you, right? The only thing you should do is not making karate moves, but just run away as fast and as quick as you can. Right, just if you're cornered, you should fight. But that's, hopefully a situation you will not have to find yourself in. But that's exactly the point we're making here. You must understand what the whole thing around is about. You don't fight against someone for no reason. These reasons are deeply rooted all over the political and social reality. You fight against someone because, I don't know, they stole something to you, they bothered you, and there is all a motive behind that. So it doesn't end just by, smashing someone's face, right? Because first of all, the consequences of it, but also of, all what this will eventually mean in your life, what this whole thing is balanced and counterbalanced by at every single moment, right? So it's as if we were tied to lots, to infinite, to an infinite amount of things. It's as if there was a resistance that prevents war to be absolute in reality. And by far, this is not just like we got closer to total war, like, I don't know, during World War II. No, we don't even get close to that. What absolute war should be and would be, because that's not real, right? That doesn't match our physical reality, right? But it's still within itself. The concept is that you should employ all that force accordingly to what your goals are. So if you pretend to do it by, not making a huge effort and trying just, to ask with courtesy about it, chances are is that, something will work with that. Other things will not. Right? And that's the whole thing, right? That's why so many people also think about how conflict defines our lives. Even in the most stupid circumstance. And that's why the Vom Kriege is interesting, because you can actually check it yourself, right? Yeah. You need force constantly, at all times. Even a speech, even an action, a decision entails force. If you don't employ it, you will not go very far. So there is this, of course, positive principle that at this point, everybody has its own reasons. Von Clausewitz is also mistakenly and stupidly, frankly, connected to the idea that, this guy justifies war, he's just a warmonger. No. Clausewitz says, first of all, if you've never been to war, you have literally no idea what the hell you're talking about. You don't know how tough, how devastating, how traumatic, and how much you want to be out of it every single moment. Right? But that's what makes you understand that if there is something like war, there are also motivations that evidently, at a political and social level, are very important. And that must be understood. That it cannot be concealed by saying, it's just human nature because humans are stupid to just quarrel against each other. Why do humans actually quarrel against each other? Because they're stupid. Chances are that a person who believes this is stupid, right? And it's not surprisingly that, as we were saying before, like such line of thinking belongs either to pacifism or to even the same militarism oppositions, being used to say war is cool, fine, right? If you meet these two kind of people, just they're simple idiots, and as such you should treat them. But aside from this, this is important in really challenging yourself at the same time. It tells you, look, are you really willing to get this? And the question is, as for many things in life, at least this is something I've been told mostly by my father, about, that is to say, I would say my mother taught me to be more diplomatic in some ways, to get, the thing more, first of all, if you can, with good manners. That is naturally very important. This is actually what Saint von Clausewitz says. But there is also another very important part of the story that I've been taught by my father, as we're saying that is, if you want to do something, or better, if there is a problem, there are two options. Either you solve them, or you don't. Right? There is not a middle way, because the middle way will always make you waste possibly even more of what the original problem at the beginning really was. And this is actually what von Clausewitz states in the same way, because he says, it's useless for you to employ less. It's how he actually literally starts the Vom Kriege. He says, that there are pretty naive people out there that thinks that war could be fought with less violent means to preserve human life. That's actually the most anti-humanitarian and anti-life behavior you can apply, because that actually will trigger not an immediate solution, but a whirlwind of complications will actually cause even more casualties along the way, according to the intensity of the thing. So this is actually very important to understand, that you must have a clarity of vision, that things do not happen by chance. We may not know how the whole thing is. We've seen the universe is not understandable, and we should be thankful for that. But at the same time, if you really want to do something in this universe, you have to be very clearly minded. You can't say either, this thing will remain at 50%. No, either you do it or you don't. And as we were saying before, naturally, there are lots of factors that will, it's a matter of priority. Life is also very economically, unfoldable in many ways. There are certain things that in life are most important to you. Then there are others that you say, okay, I will do it later, but evidently they're not as important. Why? Because after all, they don't hamper you so much, right? So but the most important thing, which in the case of war is definitely one of the most important, because you're actually risking, people's lives, the fate of entire polities. That's an enormous issue. Well, should be addressed with an enormous participation, an enormous commitment, right? If you really care, which, once again, is not what happens most of the times, because guess what? Because politics are complicated, because there are people who maybe didn't want it or want to get out of there. There are people who want it. There may be social costs. So studying history is studying exactly why this is the case, and it teaches you that the things do not happen by chance. They happen because there are specific reasons to bring to these contrasts and conflicts, right? Because this will open other conflicts within the same society, right? War is not, always remember this, that war for von Clausewitz is not declaring war and going at war with tanks and airplanes and soldiers. War here is meant as the sheer use of violence. That is to say, even if you slap someone, that's actually a war. And it stems out of the conflict. Never mistake, actually, war and conflict. They are two very different things. So human nature is inherently conflictual. It has nothing to do with what background you are, what you believe in. Human reality works through conflict. Human reality is made that if you are pressured, you have a reaction and you struggle to, and that entails, think about adrenaline and aggressiveness. That's in a positive sense, in a healthy measure. It's actually something we all need. We all need to affirm ourselves. We all need to be impetuous, to be vehement in a way. And the reason is we're trying to make something. We are trying to get somewhere. And you can see this behind every single human action and thought, right? But simply, many people, and this is the point Vom Kriege makes, do not rationalize this. Think about war in itself. It's not that war had to wait for Clausewitz to be fought in the way it has. If you study war throughout all its history, you'll see that basically all peoples fought always basically by approximation in the best way they could. Right? It is not that they didn't make mistakes or that there were, setbacks or shortcomings in that regard, but, there's always a logic in, I don't know, in strategy, in tactics, and you can see it. Not many people exchange it even as an immanent quality, but objectively doesn't go very far from it in the actual development of it. It's not immanent in the sense that you have to understand the effort that people made in order for that to happen, which is something you should make you say, wow, did we really do this? Like, were we capable of things like, I don't know, Operation Bagration, or Operation Overlord, or or Operation Barbarossa, for whichever side you want to see it in the story. Like, were humans able to applicate themselves to shoot, I don't know, at the somehow 100 million shots were fired of artillery? I mean, you understand that behind each shot there is a motivation, because you don't bomb someone for no reason. And they can be evil motivations, by the way. That this has nothing to do with the morality of it, which is really another point. But in terms of, you are in the war and you want to make something to come of it victorious, you must understand what the dynamic is. If you make relativism about it, you will lose. And we are losing it at many levels, because once again, this is not just about war. This is about the inherent conflicts that exist everywhere, political and social, and of course in war, which is the Clausewitzian trinity. So that's also why before I was saying, how can you pretend to understand anything about the world if you presume that you can learn just about politics and society, but you don't understand about war? It's like just studying, politics and war, not studying society, or just studying war and society, not studying politics. I mean, it's impossible. You will always get a wrong vision of reality. And here war is, as von Clausewitz also put it, also the potentiality of it. Right? What are our armed forces, after all, out there for? Right? What is all this kind of, what is international policy if you don't understand what's the threat behind the use of the military instrument? That's an essential part of how all civilizations have always interacted and will always will in the history of mankind. If you don't understand that, you don't understand anything. Point, because the rest is mixed with all of it. So it's as brutal as it sounds, but at least here you have the clarity of it. If you don't have it, you're gonna lose. So it's dramatic in many ways, but it's also the reality we live in, and there is a very few things we can't do. But accepting it and really starting working hard to understand it, to learn more about it, and to in fact understand the technicalities of it. That's why the humanities are important overall, not just, I don't know, very biased and narrow and kind of sometimes really, I can say unnecessary, but virtually insignificant topics. As unfortunately the hyper specialization of the academies is not obliging, but getting us used to. That's an enormous problem as well, because it lacks that comprehensive vision, makes us make that stupid mistake of pretending we can reduce the thing to a mathematical line of principles and opinions. It doesn't happen. That's not reality, especially for the things that really matter. Then von Clausewitz substantiates better this thinking. He says, in this sense, there is a waste of forces which is even worse than their employment to no purpose. That is to say, you can't even have forces that and actually he explains it in the next phrase. He says, if there must be an action, then the first point is that all parts act, because the most purposeless activity still keeps employed and destroys a portion of the enemy's force, while troops completely inactive are for the moment quite neutralized. Right? So it's very important, because he said, you can't even have your units ready for combat if you don't use them. It's as if they were already neutralized. And why would you want that? Right? We have seen, of course, this goal all doesn't contain the explanation per se, but we have read it in the last 3 chapters. chapters. We have seen why it's so damaging not to employ all your forces when you can. Right, in different ways compared to tactics and strategy, we have seen this all in the previous chapters, but still, all together. And then von Clausewitz concludes by writing, in fact, unmistakably, this idea is bound up with the principles contained in the last 3 chapters. It is the same truth, but seen from a somewhat more comprehensive point of view and condensed into a single conception. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And short chapter, but powerful one, where you really understand where Clausewitz is going, and that should make you reflect on how this whole chain, this whole logical chain, where we go step by step, chapter after chapter, is all part of greater thinking, right? It's not just going out there talking about scatter stuff, for no reason. This whole Vom Kriege is contained in one thought, of which we just see, all the various shades and perspectives on, step by step. But really, this is descending into what the thing is really about in reality proper. Right, and that's where the hard aspect of the story here is. But I think you got what I mean by this point. All right, so for now we stop it here, and I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.